Michael Tonsmeire joins me this week to discuss dry hopping. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 324. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 324, and it's late April 2025. Michael Tonsmeire joins me this week to discuss dry hopping. Thank you to this week's sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They've recently added a collection of more than 500 beer recipes from pro brewers to their site, and most let you download the BeerSmith recipe file. The new Craft Beer and Brewing recipe site is at beerandbrewing.com/beer-recipes. Again, that site is beerandbrewing.com/beer-recipes. And BeerSmith Web, the online version of BeerSmith brewing software. BeerSmith for the web lets you design great beer recipes from any browser, including your tablet or phone. Edit recipes on the go with access to the same full suite of recipe building tools as our desktop version. Try BeerSmith Web today by creating a free account at beersmithrecipes.com. And finally, a reminder to click that like and subscribe button on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or whatever platform you're listening on. Clicking those buttons is a great way to support the show. And now let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, I welcome back Michael Tonsmeire. Michael is the author of the book Sour Beers, as well as the author of the blog The Mad Fermentationist. Michael's also an award-winning brewer, certified beer judge, and founder of the brewery Sapwood Cellars in Columbia, Maryland. Michael, how are you doing today? How are things going?
Good. It's great to be on. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. How are things going at Sapwood Cellars? I think you're doing some expansion right now, right?
Yeah, we've been in the process of a modest expansion for the last 2.5 or 3 years now. We took over a little bit of space next to us, and we're adding a kitchen. It's going to be called Albuera Taqueria. So Albuera is just Spanish for sapwood. And we're sort of doing the same thing we do for beer, sort of taking inspiration from sort of classic stuff, but then updating, modernizing, localizing, doing sort of fun, unique twists on things. So we'll have sort of some traditional tacos, but we're also doing a whole bunch of, beef bulgogi tacos and a whole bunch of vegetarian options because my partner, Scott Janish, is vegan.
Yeah, and I think isn't he the one who's setting up the restaurant? I've been exchanging emails with him.
Yeah, he is just absolutely, working 7 days a week. He was in there, I think, Sunday night into early Monday morning, knocking down a temporary wall for the tasting room expansion, and he's using his truck to haul around, demolition stuff and all sorts of stuff. He is really taking a little bit of a step back from the beer side of things and letting me run wild so he can really focus on getting this thing off the ground.
That's cool. So your tasting room has been in Columbia, Maryland for some time. Is the restaurant same location or?
Yeah, so our GM Spencer has been coaching me not to call it a restaurant, to call it a kitchen. So it's a kitchen at the current location. We're really hoping to sort of appeal to people who maybe are not our current beer nerd, beer aficionado sort of people. We're really looking, hopefully, to bring in folks who are just looking to try some food. And sure, if there's local beer, they'd love to have some, but they're probably not the kind of people who are on Untapped or looking through the recent winners of brewing awards or Googling breweries near me, that kind of thing. So the goal is just to have a place that is sort of a community space and sort of has a whole different group of people who are excited to come in and hang out because at this point we're sort of, I think, have reached peak saturation on beer and beer nerds and breweries.
What is going on the beer side? I'm sure you're still brewing some new beers.
Yeah, constantly. We, I think, just crossed over our 1,000th different beer that we've brewed in our 6.5 years, which is absolutely wild. No, we're sort of doing all the same stuff. We do mostly IPAs, double IPAs, triple IPAs. We're doing a lot of West Coast Pilsners, which I've really been enjoying, just sort of taking a sort of classic Pilsner recipe and then dry hopping it with sort of typically American hops rather than the classic European varieties. And still doing a lot of fun mixed firm sour beers, even though that's not the thing that's driving sales anymore. But I love them. I'm going to keep doing them until I get kicked out.
That's awesome. Yeah. We're actually closing BeerSmithRecipes.com, the recipe site, closing on 2 million recipes. which is pretty cool if you think about it. I mean, that's a lot of recipes for beer.
Yeah, you know? we've got about 930 of them. I'll be talking to you pretty soon about an expansion.
We can take care of that. That's not a problem. Anyways, today you wanted to talk about dry hopping, and you know we tend to associate dry hopping with IPAs and a lot of the modern American beers, but dry hopping has been used for a long time for a wide variety of styles. Why is dry hopping so important for the modern brewer?
Sure, I really love dry hopped beers. I think I've just gotten used to what a really fresh, hoppy beer tastes like. And when I think about having a Hefeweizen and the entire character is traditionally sort of yeast driven, I really think a little extra hop oomph is a fun way to put a twist on that style. And that can be something. I mean, there are definitely, we make a double IPA that has a little bit of Hefeweizen yeast blended in, all cashmere, but it's really a double IPA. On a traditional Hefeweizen, I might not dry hop it, but I definitely would sort of amp up the Whirlpool edition, maybe some Saphir, maybe some Tettnang, something that's going to have a little citrusy note. But if you really want something that's going to pop or be unique or more aromatic for you, if you mostly drink IPAs, or for if you're a commercial brewer, you know, sort of the beer drinker who is used to drinking IPAs, adding a small dry hop charge really can brighten it, enliven it, give you a unique character that you're just never going to get from a beer that's 6 months old. And for a lot of people, that's something they will say, this is a better, specialer, more vibrant, more unique example of the style. Obviously, you can go too far with that, but you know, if you're a home brewer, adding a half an ounce or an ounce of a dry hop to a traditionally non-dry hopped beer is a really nice way to add depth and complexity without maybe totally overwhelming the beer like you would with an IPA or double IPA, where the dry hop is the driving character of that beer.
Yeah, I mean, so you're talking about just punching up the aroma a little bit, right?
Yeah, and without sort of the risk of adding more astringency that you might get from adding a heavy Whirlpool edition, or too much bitterness or something like that. So to me, there are a lot of compounds in hops that just don't translate. No matter how much you add to the Whirlpool or a 5-minute edition or a hop stand or whatever, the myrcene, a lot of these sort of more volatile compounds will just be blown off by heat and then scrubbed out by fermentation. And that can be a positive thing. I mean, that's some of those more durable compounds are what is traditional in a Pilsner, what is traditional in a lot of English ales. But for me, there's something really fun about having that brighter, fresher sort of character in those classic styles.
Cool. Now, when we talk about dry hopping, obviously selecting the right hops for aroma is key. How do you go about evaluating and selecting hops for dry hop?
Sure. One of the big advantages we have as a commercial professional brewery is that we get to select hops. For American hops, that means going out to Yakima in the fall, getting to smell 4, 5, 6 lots of a given variety. We get to select both a lot for pellets, T90s, Simcoe Citra Mosaic, a couple others. We also, the Yakima Chief is nice enough to let us select for cryo. So we get to pick a different lot that gets turned into cryo for us. We're small enough that we are really sort of picking up the tail ends. If a brewery, say, wants to select 4,000 pounds of Citra and the lot happens to be 4,400 pounds of Citra, we get to come in and smell everybody's leftovers. I've always wanted to know who got the rest of it. They refuse to tell anyone. But
I would imagine.
We go into the room. In America, because the hops haven't been processed yet, the bigger breweries get to choose. Do they want them blended? Do they want this to be cryo or that to be pellets? You get to smell the whole hops. So you get the whole cone hops. We just rub them between our hands. We smell them. I've always found that just getting your hands on the hops, whether it's whole hops, whether it's pellets, really feeling the texture of those hops, really breaking down those oils, warming them up in your hands, is a really great way to sort of figure out if you like the aroma or not. As a home brewer, I used to just sort of open the bag and smell it. And I've really learned sort of through doing this for the last few years, when I do that, that's a less accurate picture of what the hops really smell like, what they're really going to give to the beer. I was talking to Mitch Steele at New Realm, and he was saying that he's a big believer in making hop teas. And that's something I've really never got into, but the ASBC has a great detailed process where you mix the hops with room temperature water in just a French press. And so you mix them together, you stir it, you let it sit for a little while, press them, and then that's going to extract compounds in a different way than just rubbing. You really will see what is water soluble, which in the end of the day is really what's important. So much of the hop itself is not going to dissolve or be transferred into the beer. And even a high alcohol beer is still 90% water. And so doing it in water, or maybe even better yet, if your beer's done fermenting, take a little of that wort off of a sample valve and mix it with the hops, let them sit in a French press, stir it up, press it, and then smell that beer with either 2 or 3 different varieties, or if you happen to buy hops from a couple of different shops or a couple of different online stores, you can really try that beer, get that preview in context with how are those aromatics going to come together with the yeast character, with the other hops that are already in there from the hot side, or maybe from the first dry hop edition. And so there's a lot of really different and great options on evaluating the hops that you have. But really, I'd say part of being a great brewer is being a good editor. And if a hop doesn't smell right, particularly for dry hopping, I wouldn't use it. We'll reseal bags and we'll put them back in the cooler, and those become Whirlpool editions, because a lot of the mediocre, iffy, not quite perfect aromatics just blow off again. And so we'll use good hops for Whirlpool. We'll use great hops for dry hopping.
Well, I mean, that's an important point, because a lot of homebrewers just open the package and dump it in, and that's usually not a great idea. You really need to sample your hops before they go into your beer.
It's
real quick. Can you cover? I know you covered the hop tea thing, but can you cover the sort of how you might do a dry rub with pellets?
Sure. I think it's really important to just break the pellets down as much as you possibly can. So it doesn't have to be much. It can just be 3 or 4 or 5 pellets, and put them between your 2 palms. And you want to rub those hops until you've made a really fine powder. Mm-hmm. If you find that annoying, or you don't want to deal with that, I think the hop tea method even calls for just pureeing them in a blender or a food processor. So if you've got maybe a little, and I probably wouldn't use it for coffee after using it for hops, but just a little blade grinder that you might use for coffee or spices, buzz them up. And that, will really break them down fully, and you'll really be able to get to smell them.
Yeah, I mean, I used to just crush them up with a spoon or something, so you get it as fine a powder as you could, and then you get it up in your hands.
Yeah, and honestly, you'll learn. I kind of like the tactile sensation of rubbing them between my hands, because you'll also learn what the texture of those pellets are. And if they're really hard little rocks, and you're rubbing, and they're still just little ball bearings between your hands, maybe you'll have to be a little bit more aggressive in rousing those hops back into solution, because if you add them to a fermenter, they may just sink right to the bottom and really not extract well. Versus a hop that's a fluffy, light, powdery, minimal compression. Those may sink and rain down through your beer, really not need much additional agitation to extract.
Sure. And what do you do? I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but what do you do if you buy some hops that really don't measure up in terms of aroma and flavor, especially for a home brewer?
Yeah, we have a couple of different sort of, let's say, thresholds. So there are some hops that honestly I don't think that they smell that great, even when they're really good. I'm not a big believer in Idaho 7 as a dry hop.
Interesting.
We've tried it 3 or 4 times. It just never translates, but it is, for us, the best Whirlpool hop. It can be too much. It has this very particular, I'd say, rotten pineapple sort of thing that for me has become a marker of hops that do well in the Whirlpool, but it must be some compound that just for whatever reason just doesn't translate to dry hopping. So again, if it's a hop that just isn't a wow, reseal it, Whirlpool. Maybe one step down from that is maybe we use it for bittering. It's a hop that I won't say is awful, but just has some real serious character flaws. Hey, if I need an extra 10 IBUs at the start of a stout or something like that, I've got no problem tossing something like that in at 60 minutes or 90 minutes, fine. There are definitely hops that, as a sour beer brewery, that will age intentionally. That tends to be the more lower alpha stuff. So, for example, we do an English summer ale every year that's some combination of Styrian Goldings, U.S. Goldings, East Kent Goldings, generic English Goldings, Whitbread, whatever it is. I'll just ordered 3 or 4 bags of 2024 Goldings.
Okay.
We'll smell them all on brew day. We'll take a look at the alpha acids. We'll piece together what we think the best hops are. Will be Whirlpool hops. The okay hops that may be a little higher alpha might be a little bit earlier in the boil. And then the rest of those hops probably end up on, we have just a palette of hops that are aging for 4, 5, 7, 9, whatever years, until eventually they smell sort of like dried hay and are not offensive, but also are just sort of most of their character is gone.
So I mean, do you intentionally stale the hops like they do with some of the Belgian, I don't know, lambics and so on?
Yeah, no, so exactly. It's just we'll also, like, if there's another local brewery that says, hey, we've got, we just found the back of our cooler, we got this Celia from 2017. Do you guys want it? Or a local hop supplier knows that we want it and will sell us stuff for $1 a pound that's a few years old. And so again, like I wouldn't probably buy $10 or $12 a pound fresh hops with that intent, but it's a backup plan so that I can order more hops than I need for a particular beer and do my own selection there, and smell the hops and use the best hops for that English summer ale and save the stuff that's okay or meh or oh boy, that bag got punctured accidentally and now the hops are a little bit oxidized. Give them some potential value.
Well, dry hopping carries some risks associated with it, and one of those certainly is oxygen. And I know you mentioned in your article that you wrote, oxygen can be a real problem. What are some of the things you can do to help minimize the oxygen, particularly when inducing, dry hops into your fermenter?
Yeah, no, that's really, I think it's one of the biggest places where homebrewed IPA goes wrong. Scott and I, our brewers, are not necessarily fond of the hoops that we have them jump through to eliminate oxygen, because when you're talking about commercial beer, you're talking about parts per billion.
Sure.
A billion is a very big number, and trying to make the amount of oxygen in that beer under 20 ppb, 20 parts per billion, at packaging it's tough, particularly because there's oxygen often that's compressed down into the pellets. There is,
that level's similar to, I believe, what some of the big brewers produce, right?
Yeah, no, and that's the goal, and they're often, once you start trying to hit those numbers with filtration, with a centrifuge, it gets even harder. We tend to do a lot of unit tanking, and so our risk points are a lot smaller, but also we're big believers in doing everything we possibly can. So the way we sort of generally dry hop is the company actually just announced they're going out of business. There's a company called Marks that makes hop dosers. And so the idea is that we have a big valve on the top of our tank. We put the hops into just this metal container, close it, and then we purge it with CO2. We pressurize it with CO2 to 15 psi 10 times, blowing down up to 15, blowing down. And then we open that big valve on the tank, and that allows us to essentially have an airlock, for lack of a better phrasing, where the hops are in there, they're purged of any oxygen, and then they're dropped into the beer.
Sure.
That allows us also to drop hops in after the beer is partially carbonated, after the beer has been spunded, anything like that. As a home brewer, I would just count on the continued fermentation, the active fermentation during the last 1 or 2 Plato of fermentation to scrub any oxygen.
So you're suggesting add the hops just a little bit earlier than you probably normally would, right?
Yeah, and you're going to lose some hop character. The more active fermentation you have, again, it's like adding hops to the whirlpool. You're having CO2 generated. That CO2 is allowed to exit. It's going to carry up those aromatics up and out. And when you dry hop a beer during fermentation, it smells great. And that's the problem, is that those great aromatics that you're trying to infuse into the beer are coming up and out of the airlock, and you're smelling them. And so I would do a 2-step process at home. I would do about half my hops as pellets, warm in the fermenter as that krausen was starting to die down. I'd let fermentation finish. Those hops will settle out with the yeast. Again, might cause trouble if you're trying to reuse the yeast. Now you've got hops mixed in with it. And then I would go into a keg. And I'd sort of do the same process we do now with the hops in reverse, for lack of a better phrasing. So I would put the hops into the keg. I'd purge the keg with CO2, and then I would transfer in the beer into that purged keg with the hops already in it. So in that case, I would usually do whole hops. I would usually have them in like a canister screen that you can buy online, sort of mesh screen, and that way the hops are contained. They're not going to come out of that and clog up your dip tube or cause any other trouble. And I'm a big believer in dry hopping cold. That was something that Scott had pushed for a long time. That's what the science says, that a lot of those fruity compounds come out just as quickly or nearly as quickly at 40 as they do at 70. But what comes out a lot slower are the polyphenols, the harsher compounds. That was
actually my next topic: is what temperature is ideal for dry hopping?
Like a lot of things in brewing, you ask 10 brewers and there's 10 or more answers. I have a huge amount of respect for the folks at a lot of other great breweries, and everybody's got a different process. Some places drop in their hops when the beer is warm and don't do anything else. Some of them rouse their beer 7 or 8 times warm. Some of them, I think we're probably colder than most people. We do initial dry hop around 50, 55, something like that. And then we do a final dry hop pretty close to freezing.
Wow.
And that's worked for us. Well, I'm a big believer in drinking my beer next to other great examples, and I kept finding our beers had a harshness to them, a lingering, not a hop burn, which I think of as in the throat, more that sort of harshness. This is like a tannic, over-extracted black tea kind of thing where it would stick to my tongue. As we brought the temperature down, I noticed that less and less. The problem was I also noticed the hop aromatics less and less. And so we had just been sort of rousing the hops by hooking up CO2 to the bottom of the tank, running sort of a blast, closing it, running another second, closing it, just trying to get a burp, a blast that would sort of stir the hops up. And we had a beer that was all cryo hops. I think it was 6 or 7 pounds per barrel, which is just, wow. I mean, like a pound in 5 gallons, and all cryo. And we burped it 2 or 3 times over a couple of days. And then I went to drop the hops out of the cone and whole pellets were coming out. And I just went nuts to this. And I just hooked up CO2 and I turned it on for about 2 minutes. And I pulled the sample off the sample valve. And sure enough, it was hop soup. It looked like confetti in there. And so we've been slowly becoming more and more aggressive with our rousing. We've played around with pumps. We've played around with.
So what do you think? What do you think the rousing's doing in this case? Is it actually helping extract more aroma out of the hops, for example?
Yeah. So I believe Scott's a chemistry guy. I'm a physics guy. I'm a big believer in, to get extraction from something, it needs to be up in solution. If all the hops, as a home brewer, your hops in a bucket might be sitting in, say, a 1/4-inch layer at the bottom of a flat bucket. As a commercial brewery trying to add 44 or 88 pounds of hops to a tank that has a cone at the bottom, my hops are probably ending up as just a big 3-foot thick wad of hops at the bottom, and there's very little interaction between that beer layer and that hop layer if it's all at the bottom. And so what we're really trying to do is get those hops back up into suspension, or with a pump, keep them in suspension so that there's more time. There's just more molecules bumping into each other. There's more chance for a lot of those compounds that are not water loving. They're compounds that will dissolve into water, but need some help. And so that's something where
most aromatics are aromatic because they don't like dissolving in solution, really, right?
Exactly. And alcohol is a really fantastic solvent, but beer is, again, only 6, 7, 8% alcohol. So it's really not an especially effective extractant for a lot of those compounds. And so that's something, again, like a lot of hop companies are now moving towards extract, where they are pre-dissolving hop compounds into propylene glycol or into ethanol or something else doing that hard work for you and saying, hey, you can use a much smaller amount and still get similar results. I'm a big believer that like I love extracts and we play around with them a lot, but the real hops, you're getting a lot more than just fractionalized selected aromatics.
Sure,
you're getting that whole breadth of compounds.
Well, the next question obviously is what's the appropriate dosage rate? I know people, are all over the map again on this. What's the appropriate dosage rate for dry hopping?
Sure. I mean, like anything, what's the appropriate amount of malt? I think it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. For us, we started at say, and maybe you're better at this than me, but my rule of thumb I think is that half the pounds per barrel is ounces per gallon because a barrel is 31 gallons and 2 pounds is 32 ounces. So we used to be 2 pounds per barrel for a pale ale, which would be like 1 ounce per gallon.
That sounds about right.
Which is pretty sizable. We're higher than that now. Our IPAs used to be 1.5 ounces per gallon. Our double IPAs used to be 2 ounces per gallon. Now it's, a lot of the double IPAs are 2 or 3 ounces per gallon, and half of that's cryo, and we're adding some oil on top of that.
Well, I know the hazies go even worse, right?
Yeah,
even higher.
Your true colors are coming out, Brad. Even worse. No, but exactly. It's we really want those beers to be wow aromas, and for me, that's picking great hops. It's adding a lot of hops over a couple of editions, so we're often 2 or 3 equally spaced editions, and then just making sure your varieties work and play well together. I'm a big believer in 2, maybe 3 hop varieties for dry hopping a single beer. A lot of people will say like, oh, well, all hazy IPAs taste the same, and the truth is that like a lot of the big producers are using 5 or 6 different hop varieties as a way to make a consistent product year to year. Hop varieties, lot to lot change. If you use a whole bunch of different varieties, if one of them really shifts or you can't get, access to one of them anymore, you're still going to have something that's pretty similar compared to if you have a beer that's 100% Nelson Sauvin or 100% Galaxy.
Sure. Yeah.
And so for me, like 2 varieties is sort of the sweet spot usually where you're, if one's got a little of this and one's got a little of that, they sort of balance each other out. But it's a way to avoid having all your beers taste the same. We put out a lot of IPAs and double IPAs. I want, if somebody has 2 of them next to each other, say, wow, this one with Nelson really, maybe I can't put my finger in maybe my, whether it's gooseberry or Sauvignon Blanc or rhubarb, but there's something distinct there that I don't get in this other one that's more citrusy and fruity. And that's, I think, hopefully what keeps IPA vibrant. It's why people keep making IPAs and people keep searching out IPAs, and you don't maybe have that same culture of people looking for Pilsners, because there's really fantastic Pilsners out there, but the best ones all kind of taste the same as each other, where for IPAs, you can have 3 or 4 IPAs that are all fantastic and have almost none of the same aromatics in common. And when you blend together a bunch of hops, each of which has a lot of the same compounds, just in different ratios, you're ending up with sort of an average profile rather than something that is pushed in one direction.
Sure. Well, what about duration? When I started brewing, we used to use very long dry hop durations, and now there's certainly been a move towards much shorter exposure times.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is just these higher dry hopping rates that what you run into when you have really long contact, particularly warm, particularly with a lot of agitation, is green, vegetal, cabbagey. There's just a lot of plant material in there, and that just extracts too. You're getting chlorophyll. You're getting the stuff that you maybe don't want because it's just not the bright, fruity, tropical, vibrant compounds. It's the cooked vegetal sort of thing. And so for us, a lot of beers, it's 24 hours. We'll drop the hops in one day. We'll rouse them. We'll let them fall back down overnight. We'll rouse them back up again in the morning. And then by that second night, maybe a third of them have dropped out. We'll start dropping them out. And the next day we'll drop more hops out. And the next day we'll drop more hops out, and then we'll add another dose. Trying to get as much of those spent hops out as we can before the next dose goes in and they all get stirred up again together. I think probably 2, 3, 4 days is probably more common. But for us at these really high dry hop rates, we're really trying to just get the best of the best aromatics out of it and not try to wring the last little bit of aroma out of the hops at the expense, the risk of getting polyphenols, of getting these sort of other compounds we're not looking for.
Yeah, I think most people settled on something like 24 to 72 hours kind of a thing. But so commercial brewers often talk about double and triple hop beers. Is there really a big advantage to using multiple doses of hops? I know you mentioned you often multiple dose. And I mean, is a triple dry hop any better than a single?
Well, I'll say that a lot of brewers, when they say double dry hop, don't mean that it was hopped twice. They mean vaguely that this has double the amount of hops of a normal amount that we would add.
Okay.
In the same way that a double IPA isn't really double the alcohol of an IPA, no. It's a little bit more. For us, and I try whenever I can to talk about two-stage dry hopping. Partly it is it's just a volume game that it can be very hard to get good extraction when you have that much vegetative material all in there at once. Mm-hmm. And that splitting it up into a couple of doses can help you to more thoroughly mix and thoroughly extract the hop aromatics, drop them out, and then add more. When we run a pump to recirculate, you can run into trouble if you have too much hop material in there. It'll actually start to gum up the pump, and the pellets will start causing trouble. There's a risk in that the green material in hops can actually strip out hop compounds that are already in solution. And so if you're doing 3, 4, 5, 6, there's a point at which you're really going to get diminishing returns, where a new dose of hops will just be taking back out as much aroma as it's putting in. And so for us, I tend to use those more concentrated products, whether it is Cryo, Lupomax, CGX, lupulin pellets. There are sort of a lot of different marketing terms for essentially they've removed about half of the green material. So your alpha acid goes from 10% to 20%. Your total oil goes from 1 or 2% to 3 or 4%. And those I find work better at colder temperatures. They don't strip out as much as the pellets do. They're less likely to get vegetal because there's less of the green material. And I think that they often have a bigger, bolder hop expression, hop extraction. They tend to be ground finer, and so they tend to be a little bit more powdery. They tend to stay in suspension longer, whereas a lot of pellets will fall out quicker. And so for me, that's worked.
As I understand it, a lot of these are variations of lupulin powder, right? Aren't they basically? I mean, they're using in many cases different methods to extract the part, but the idea is they're trying to extract the brightest, sort of the most bitter portion of the hop cone, right?
Yeah, and they're sold both. I mean, Scott and I are not great targets for we just talk to all our sales reps and they always say, oh, you can use half as much and your yield will go up by 10%. And Scott and I just invariably say, well, what happens if we use the same amount that we would have otherwise? Do we get twice as much aroma? That's always sort of been what I want is I want more better aroma, not an extra barrel of beer. At the end of the day, I mean, there's 10,000 breweries in the country, and we're lucky to be in a position where we don't have to be as price conscious as a big brewery that's trying to do distro and have beer on store shelves and make those margins. But the sort of the other side is that we need to make beer that's unique enough and special enough, and that's marketing, it's flavor, to get people to come to our brewery to drink it. And that means using more and more expensive ingredients because that's how we get there. And so for me, that's always been how do I use these new products to create something special and unique and more potent, more powerful, more expressive. And I'm really a big fan of the cryo in particular. I think is great. Some of the other ones are good, but really the question is like, what's the variety? What's the extraction? Are they keeping it cold enough to not volatilize? the higher the concentration of oil you have in the pellet,
Sure.
when you pelletize it, the temperature goes up faster, which then you're potentially losing aromatics because you're getting too hot. And so that's cryo is named because they're using liquid nitrogen to keep the equipment cool enough so that they can pelletize without flashing off these aromatics.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about hop oil additives. There's a whole bunch of new ones now that can be added even at bottling, and some of them aren't even derived from hops. I know Abstracts makes a number of aroma oils that are very hop-like. They can duplicate aroma profiles for individual hops that in many cases aren't even made from hops.
Yeah, no, and we're big fans of Abstracts. Honestly, the thing I'm most fond of for Abstracts, we're going to be saving them a lot of money soon, is that they, at our scale, they'll take 3 boxes of your selected hops, and they will run them through their process and extract your oils from your selected hops.
Wow.
And that, to me, so much oil, you're essentially buying like a home brewer buying spot hops. You're buying a gallon of hop extract from Citra. What Citra? What lot was it? Where was it grown? How old was it? We don't know. And that's one of I think the really great things Abstracts is doing. And they ran a couple of small runs for us of Citra and Simcoe, and I was really impressed by them. I'll say that their non-hop derived hop-like terpenes I don't care for particularly.
Yeah.
They have that weed pen, for lack of a more delicate way to put it.
I understand.
A artificial pot thing that at a very low level I could imagine working. We added too much to a couple of beers, and the aroma is great, but it has this retro olfactory hop burp sort of thing that you don't notice until after you've had half a glass of it. So it did
I didn't mention it. Abstracts actually has several different lines, and many of them are hop derived too. But I just find it interesting that they're doing both.
Oh yeah,
both sides there.
And so the line I really like is Quantum Bright.
Sure.
We also use their cannabis derived ones. We sponsor a disc golf tournament, and our disc golf brewer Joe pitched doing a mango pineapple express terpene beer. And that's great. And so if you're looking to make the sort of crossover beer for the cannabis enjoyer, I think their cannabis terpenes are really fun and unique and potent. And I think their Quantum Bright stuff is a lot less like extracty. There's just like an extracty flavor in a lot of hop extracts.
Sure.
That it says, once you've smelled a couple of them, this isn't what hops smell like. It's almost right, but there's something weird about it, something unique. A couple of our guys really can taste propylene glycol. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the hop extracts are in propylene glycol. And there's this, I'm not sensitive to it, but they say there's a slickness to the palate. There's something pretty apparent, even at a very, very low rate. There's a lot of potential health stuff with propylene glycol too. And I know like Whole Foods no longer carries anything with propylene glycol flavor-wise. But yeah, those are great.
I mean, these things are really cool because you can add them to taste after the beer is complete. And Abstracts, I should mention, isn't the only company doing it. Yakima has Hyperboost, and I know there's several other companies in the business as well of making hop oil extracts that you can just add to a finished beer.
Yeah, no, and that's how I spent my afternoon. We did a tequila barrel-aged triple IPA. We dry hopped it with Motueka, and it just didn't have quite that oomph. And luckily, I had some Motueka hop oil, and so I took a glass of 200 mils, and I took my micro pipette, and I dosed it, and I gave it samples to the other brewers and to Scott, and we all kind of discussed it and came up with the rate that we really liked. And it lets you, honestly, as a brewer, feel more like a chef. I mean, the big thing about cooking is you taste the beer or you taste the food as you're going. A little bit more salt. This maybe needs a little bit more acid. The recipe called for half a teaspoon of pepper, but for whatever reason, maybe I didn't grind it as fine as usual. It didn't pop. I'll add a little bit more. And with beer, I think that's a mindset that I had for sour beer for a long time. And now over the last couple of years, I've really embraced as just part of what making an IPA or what making a stout is about. It's we did a chili pepper stout, and it wasn't spicy enough. So we did a little concentrated dried habanero extraction and dosed in 3 ounces of that. And that was, the little bit of extra heat we needed. And so generally my sort of opinion is I use extracts or tinctures or whatever it is to get the beer that I made to where I want it. Right. But then I learned that lesson of, hey, I need to add some vanilla extract to this orange vanilla beer. Next time, rather than adding 1 pound of vanilla beans, I'll add 1.5 pounds.
Sure, sure.
That's how I get this beer from good to very good. But then I learned that lesson, hopefully, to get it to that next level up. And I think the hop extracts are great for that. And again, the sort of claim generally is that you will get better shelf life because hops auto-oxidize. They have trapped oxygen in the pellets. And so that by switching to more extract, you will improve shelf stability. But it's really the way I always think about it is when they say the Egg Council says eating eggs lowers your cholesterol as long as you're eating eggs instead of eating liver or bacon or whatever it is. And so really what they're saying is if you dry hop at 2 pounds per barrel rather than 4 pounds per barrel, but then get your aromatics from hop oils, then you'll have better shelf life. If you dry hop at 4 pounds per barrel and then add hop extracts, it won't necessarily improve your hop extract.
And I mean, shelf life is a real concern with a lot of these very hoppy beers. They just don't have, these aromatics don't survive very well for a variety of reasons, right?
Yeah. And we've all gotten just so used to drinking fresh beer. I mean, I think that was one of the things that really turned me on to homebrewing originally was I would make an IPA and it would just absolutely blow out of the water these beers that I was getting on the shelf because they've been sitting warm on the shelf for 6 months.
Yeah.
I think that was homebrewers only for a while. But now that local tasting rooms, tap rooms, brew pubs have become so prevalent and everyone's doing IPAs and everyone's focused on really pushing things, I think consumers have really gotten used to drinking really fresh, bright IPAs. I love my uncle. He's a fantastic guy. When I turned 21, he gave me a speech about how Heineken was, the right beer to drink. Not too frou-frou, but shows you're kind of fancy. He comes into Sapwood now and he drinks double IPA and he'll complain about other people's double IPAs. He said, I won't name large West Coast brewery, but he said he got, a 6-pack on sale somewhere. And he said, I figured out why it was on sale and the rest of it went down the sink. He doesn't necessarily have the vocabulary to review a beer and communicate it, but he knows what really good fresh IPA tastes like. Yeah. And I think more and more beer drinkers are keyed into what makes a beer great. And so much of it is freshness, cold storage, low package oxygen, all those things that as a homebrewer, you don't have to be quite as worried about. Although for a lot of homebrewers, if you make a 5-gallon keg of IPA and you also want to go out and drink beer elsewhere, you might not be going through that 5-gallon keg of IPA in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. It might be a month. And, keeping your
makes a difference.
Process good. Yeah, really let you enjoy that whole keg. We played around for a while with pomegranate extract, ellagic acid, which helps to remove heavy metals, which promotes copper and iron, facilitate, catalyze oxidation reactions. And we were doing it in our hazy IPAs, and we are still doing it in almost everything else. But in the hazy IPAs, it promoted clarity. And so that was something where the market currently, the hazier, the paler, the better. And it was adding maybe 1 SRM and lightening up the haze just a little bit and just making the beer so they weren't that beautiful white golden glow. They were a little bit more, not even amber, but just maybe a little bit more golden. But that stuff has been great in stouts and lagers and all of those. I'd very much encourage people to look into that. There's a commercial version of a slightly different compound called Mash Life that Murphy and Sons distributes, or you can just buy ellagic acid, and both of them do this great job chelating metals.
Awesome. I actually just wrote an article on metals, actually, and their effect on beer. But I wanted to ask here at the end, what are some of the results you've had, and what are your closing thoughts on dry hopping?
Sure. I'd just say to really think about your dry hopping process is a tool. And so colder dry hopping is going to give you a bigger, fresher, really a more raw nose in the hop bag hop aroma, rather than just those sort of brighter, fruitier sort of aromatics you might get from a smaller dose, warmer. And to think about what kind of beer you want to make. Colder dry hopping will produce a smoother, cleaner sort of thing. It won't give you as much perceived bitterness. And so I really like cold dry hopping for, say, a West Coast Pilsner, where you're going on to a beer that's maybe finishing at, 1.5 or 2 Plato, and more bitterness, more harshness, more roughness is going to be more apparent. Same thing for a Saison, same thing for a mixed firm dry sour beer. All of those, I think, really benefit from cold dry hopping because you really just want that bright, fresh hop aroma. Whereas, hey, a hazy triple IPA, we'll finish those at 6 or 7 Plato, in the mid 1020s for specific gravity. They can stand up to a little bit more roughness, a little bit more hop grittiness, for lack of a better sort of phrasing. And that's something that we'll sort of mix and match. We'll use some of those warmer dry hopping, some of that colder dry hopping. And so I just say, try these things out for yourself. Really drink your beer critically. Smell the hops. Put down notes on those hops. See what of those compounds come through in the finished beer. Try your beer next to other great breweries. If you made a Simcoe IPA and you live near a Treehouse or a Trillium or another half or a Monkish or 1,000 other great breweries, and they happen to put out a Simcoe double IPA, get a can of theirs, get draft of yours, bottle of yours, whatever it is, pour them next to each other, and go back and forth and really think about where your beer is better or where maybe theirs has the edge on yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate you coming on the show and taking time. I know you're between trips, actually. I caught you just in time. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks again, Brad. I really appreciate getting to sit back and talk about beer.
A pleasure. My guest today was Michael Tonsmeire, the author of Sour Beers, as well as founder of Sapwood Cellars in Columbia, Maryland. Thank you again, Michael.
Cheers, Brad. Thanks again.
Well, a big thank you to Michael Tonsmeire for joining me this week. Thanks also to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They recently added a collection of more than 500 beer recipes from pro brewers to their site, and most let you download the BeerSmith recipe file. The new craft beer and brewing recipe site is at beerandbrewing.com/beer-recipes. Again, that site is beerandbrewing.com/beer-recipes. And BeerSmith Web, the online version of BeerSmith brewing software. BeerSmith for the web lets you design great beer recipes from any browser, including your tablet or phone. Edit recipes on the go with access to the same full suite of recipe building tools as our desktop version. Try BeerSmith Web today by creating a free account at beersmithrecipes.com. And finally, a reminder to click that like and subscribe button on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or whatever platform you're on. Clicking those buttons is a great way to support the show. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great brewing week.